Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Sameshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Ancient secrets revealed. So today, this is a really important and interesting topic. I'm going to do my best to do it justice in a short time period of a podcast here. There's a model that's used, and I was first introduced to it from a Western perspective. I thought some Western guy came up with it, but then I was actually in a bookstore in Manhattan, and I saw a book on the shelf, and there it was. It's right out of the Veda, and what it talks about is just reason, will, and emotion, and how the different energy centers, chakras like that in the body, are oriented in that way. In other words, and if you just feel into it yourself, you don't really need to even see it in a book. But then we get into the power of naming. Naming it is very important. These are the emotional centers, and that's how you feel. And there's a vulnerability to our emotions. Just as there's a vulnerability to this area, so it's really intuitively obvious once it's stated. Yeah, these are the emotional centers versus up the back. Those are the will centers, and all sorts of little slang expressions apply to this sort of all these things. Put your back into it. It's a will center. We could go through all the chakras, and you can find terms just right out of normal conversation that represent that. And then there's these centers up here. What's this? Well, this is the reason centers. Reason. Now, that's interesting because what really is reason? Reason, I've talked about this in the past. You have thoughts, and there's more superficial, but as you go deeper, you get into this area of reason. Reason is sort of the integration between feeling and thoughts. It's more subtle. Something becomes reasonable when it resonates with not just your thinking, but your emotional centers. But these upper chakras then they're referred to as reason centers. And they also, as I've talked about in the past, particularly the crown chakra, connects out to the top, heaven above. And that's where our real communion with the foundation of existence lies, on a physiological, we'll call it a psychoenergetic level. Now, what do I mean by that? Everything is the absolute, everything is God, right? But the way our physiology functions, there's an inclination when we think of heaven above, we think of it as above. And we go like this. It's very common, I feel heaven above. But if you think about it, that's not just the crown. A lot of people think of the crown chakra as the thing that connects to divinity or heaven above. And I've even seen people kind of walk around like this, trying to feel the connection. But does that look natural? This is much more natural because it's a integration of the front of the sixth chakra and the crown, through which we commune with heaven above. And why is heaven above? Why isn't it below? Or why isn't it in this table? Well, it is, but with respect to the human physiology, the way our human physiology functions, this is sort of like the portal through which, in a psychodynamic sense, directly related to the energetic sense, meaning the chakras, the energy system, that's how we connect to it. Okay? Now, it's interesting too, because there's a mirror image of this for the first chakra, the root chakra, in the back of the second chakra, the sacrum area. And that's interesting because a lot of times the same kind of thing. People, okay, root chakra, so connect to Mother Earth and stuff and send roots down from the first chakra down into the earth. But you can do that, and there's the validity to it in the same sense as the crown chakra, this connection to divinity. But really in a psychophysiological sense, the way our physiologies work, and not just our physical physiologies, but our energetic physiologies, we connect to that just like with the front. It's the front of the sixth and the crown. It's the back of the second and the root. So they're kind of like mirror images. And because, like, think about it, when you roll a boulder or a snowball, when you're making a snowman or whatever, you don't just push like this, you push like this. You put your back into it. Back of the second chakra and the root chakra together. So you see all this energetic stuff. Now, this is the important point, is that all of this energetic stuff is really our own experience. But what we're doing here is we're naming it very specifically. In fact, we can do this with all the chakras. We're naming it very specifically in reference to what we experience, what's just normal for us. But there's the important principle here is that the power of the naming, because when you think about it, gravity's been around forever, right? But it wasn't until Sir Isaac Newton named it. He named it, gravity is a thing and an entity in itself that he could study. And, 100 years later, we're landing people on the moon, 200 years later. So there's the power in the naming. And like that, on a very practical level, there's power in the naming of the qualities and values and characteristics of the human energy system. Now, oftentimes, when people look at the Vedic literature and want to read about chakras, what do they look at? Well, they look at these pictures and the yantras and these pictures of the chakras on very deep levels, and the Sanskrit letters etched on the petals and all like that. And that's, of course, all valid. But that's a very deep, almost transcendental level of understanding what the chakras are. And what's important then is we integrate our surface level of life, our daily level of life with that value. And it doesn't mean that we have to see the connection. Oh, yeah, that's how that works. Though that would be really interesting to do. But just pragmatics, heart chakra. Nobody ever says, oh, my elbow is breaking. And I'd say my heart is breaking. Why? Because this is an energy center that relates to interpersonal relationships, love. All the centers are like that. But the power is in the naming. Because once you name it, that's when you start to work with it. And even in the naming, these are emotional centers. Those are will centers. These are reason centers. There's a power in that naming. You can start to work with it. You start to understand it, to deal with it in a way where we have a certain understanding of life on whatever level it is. Oh, yeah, that's a pain in the neck, back of the fifth chakra. Or I've been thinking too much. I got a headache, front of the sixth chakra. Now what we develop with our understanding of human energetics is a deeper understanding of it. And that goes far beyond just chakras and the reason, will, emotion model. It includes, when you walk into a room, it feels a certain way. When you're around a person and talking to a person, you can feel that person. And but when you open to that, and we're using the word energy. I mean, I think sometimes the word energy takes on a negative connotation because there's so much, silliness around it. But in a very practical sense, you can feel, what are you feeling when you feel a person that's angry, but not showing their anger, but you can feel it. you're sensing what we're going to name, because there's power in the naming. We're naming that energy. And that opens the gateways between just some vague sense where you almost discount your intuitive felt sense. And that's what we'll call that, feeling energy. It's an intuitive felt sense. You almost override it. Whereas if you really think about it, your relationship with another person, any other person, has more to do with the spontaneous energy dynamic that is set up between the two of you than it has to do with the words. The words follow the energetics. The energetics don't follow the words. Now, again, if you feel good about somebody and they say something really nasty to you, okay, heart chakra closes, boom. And so words can affect the energy. But generally speaking, what's really more foundational is that the energetics determines what words are spoken, you see? Does that all make sense, Scotty?
Absolutely. I have a couple of things that just came to me. Can you talk about how, like, you were talking about somebody getting headaches or my back hurts or, is it sometimes that people get stuck in not letting the chakras move or transition from one to the other? You're stuck in one.
For sure. Why is lower back pain so common? Well, you see, the energy, the earth energy, the physical energy of our body and everything in nature comes from Mother Earth, and it comes up then through the feet and wells up through the body. That's physicality. That's why if you don't have a good connection with the earth plane, if you will, we talked about spirituality currents the other day where they're living up here. And so their connection to the earth isn't good. And so the body becomes thin, emaciated, left, right imbalances. They're not really connected to the earth. But if you have an energy coming up here and all this power, because it is power, and when it comes up, if you feel the need somehow to modulate it, to suppress it, if you can't really express it in a meaningful and viable way, so then you tend to what? You tend to block it, and that causes lower back pain. The whole human physiology, all aspects of it. They say that health is psychosomatic predominantly. We eat herbs, that's good. We watch our diet, that's good. We exercise, whatever, to take care of our physical health. And that's all important and good. But really the primary determining factor is our psychodynamics and how that relates to the energy system. So how we hold our energy system affects our psychodynamics. Our psychodynamics affects how we hold our energy system. It goes both ways, you see. Is that responsive, Scotty?
Absolutely. And then I remember when I think it was going through the Surya 2 program where you actually show us, how that physicality, how you can interact with it with that, it was just using those pendulum things, where you hold them over the centers and they either spin right or left.
Those are all processes by which I used to say, you teach people how to feel. We've lost our ability to feel. We rely more on machines and logic than we do about emotions. Now, our emotions run us in a lot of ways, but the thing is they're not managed. Managed isn't even the right word. They're not refined. They are what they are. But really feeling energy properly isn't about projection based on our own individual issues, our shit that we've talked about, our subconscious mind, how it determines what we think consciously. But to really feel means what? It means to touch into the divinity within our own being and feel from that place of non-judgment, non-bias, not preconceived notions, no programming. And it's something that can be learned. That's why when I used to teach hands-on healing, I stopped. The main reason I stopped is because, you know, you're kind of swimming around in other people's stresses and stuff. And when you help clear all of that, it gets all over. And not, it's not that pleasant, you know. But the thing is, there was a value. And so the big part of the school where I taught hands-on healing was teaching people how to feel. I used to say, if you can feel it, you can heal it, you know. But also healing chakras, and that it's not about, and it's commonly done among people that, you know, are energy healers, but they go and they try to make the chakra look like a picture in the book. You know, they'll go in and try to pry the chakra open, and they impose a preconceived notion on the chakra, and that's not right. Chakras have they root again right into the absolute and the depth of our being. They're very, very powerful things and very subtle things. So instead of imposing our will upon them, what we do is we support them in their own natural blossoming. They already know what to do. You know, nobody would take a flower and peel the petals back to try to turn it into a blossom. Nobody would take a bud and try to peel the petals back, turn it into a blossom. You water it, you nurture it, you support it, and it just naturally blossoms into something beautiful. And that's really the art of hands-on healing, you know. So I remember, this is just a funny memory. It was in Manhattan. I was teaching there, and another energy healer in Manhattan wanted to get a session with me. So I said, all right. And so I gave them a session, and afterwards they said, oh, well, they said it was, you know, double-sided sword, you know, two-edged sword. They said, oh, well, that was a very nice evaluation. The implication being that they didn't really feel anything imposed upon the surface level of their physiology. I didn't say anything. I said, yeah, thanks, you know, but the truth is that to really heal, you go into the depth, you go into the root, you go into the foundation, you touch into the divinity within their being and well that up. And that's a process. But it's very different than, you know, taking a bomb and detonating the chakra. You know, chakras are supposed to blossom, not detonate. But you feel a lot more if somebody goes in and tears it open. You know, and people, wow, that was incredible healing. Well, you just got your chakra ripped open, you know. And that's in my notes. I talk about understanding versus overstanding. Overstanding is like, okay, I know what your chakras are supposed to look like, and I'm going to make them look like that, and then you're going to be healed. Well, that's not right. In fact, we talked last week about the 5 divine currents, and the one that is like the perfection current. And that's how people hold their energy. If they have a predominance of karma around that, they got to be perfect. So they train themselves to hold other chakras perfectly. If you look at them, even if you feel into their chakras energetically, all their chakras are lined up. They're all open. Everything's fine. It's all deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. It's more about our relationship with our energy system than about our energy system defining who we are, if I said that well enough. Okay. So the other thing, I teach this stuff. The classes last years, and we're not going to do all that, but I just wanted to give you a little idea. And I would say in your daily life, pay attention to the energy, and the energy dynamic between you and other people. There was somebody that recently, just as an example, and whenever I talked to this person, I felt like there was one arena, one subject. If we were talking about it, I felt a block go up immediately. And that happened several times. I didn't really say anything, but one time I said, every time this comes up, I feel a block. I feel like you put up a wall. You see, you can feel it. Everybody can feel that. But I named it, and I said, so, what's that about? And the conversation that unfolded was great. How they perceived me, kind of confronting that wall in the past in conversations and my actual motivation behind that were just two radically different things. Anyway, the point is, if you can feel certain energy dynamics and you can name them and even speak of it as the elephant in the room, if you will, start to speak from that place and commune with other people on that level, it opens up worlds. It opens up worlds, What happens, you see, if you don't do that, we get caught up in narratives. We get caught up in debates. And they're all based on narratives that aren't really based on the depth of our being. They're based on kind of preconceived notions. And that's kind of the reason center's gone wild, and also the emotional center's gone wild. And there's no real coherence there, no real rooting into the depth of our being. It makes sense to us on the surface, then we impose it upon deeper levels of our being, our emotions and that. And that's, boy, if you look at the history of the world, that's the stuff wars are fought over. And the human mentality, it's so susceptible to manipulation in that regard. The endless examples of that. So touching into the depth, coming from the depth, and seeing how that interfaces with human energetics at the moment even, can open up worlds. And that's the direction that all this is going. There's this story in Vedic literature about the churning of the ocean. You got the devas, you could say the laws of nature, the absolute, if you will. And then you got the asuras, the rakshasas, often thought it was the bad guys. And they're in a tug of war over the ocean of being, the ocean of existence. And so they're tugging back and forth, and the waters of the ocean all churn. And what comes out of those waters then is the nectar of immortality, the nectar of perfection, if you will. Now, what's that about, really? What's the deal on that? You have the absolute, and then you have people functioning in relativity with their preconceived notions, their understandings, their identities, how they hold their chakras, which relates to their perspective on life and others. And as we go through life, then there's a back and forth between those two things, our deeper understanding, our inner wisdom, and what we tell ourselves our inner wisdom is, our deeper understanding and the intellectual paradigms and narratives we've bought into. And those things are in a tug of war. But as we live through life, eventually, through that churning process, any aspects of the chit, the preconceived notions, the identities, the limited thinking, the ashura value, gets refined out, gets purified out, until finally we're living in harmony with our own true nature, the devas, if you will. And in that moment, it's not even a moment, but during that transition, what are we doing? We're evolving. And ultimately, then, what comes out of that process is the nectar of immortality, And we've talked about that. We've talked about Brahman consciousness, higher levels of consciousness, what immortality really means. That's a previous podcast. So that's what we're talking about here. And understanding human energetics and working with it and being conscious of it can take you a long ways, It's really worth giving some attention to. All right. I guess that's about it, Scotty, unless you have something else. Oh, I have something else. I wanted to mention this last time and I didn't. There's a thing, typically, particularly in the West, Jyotish is pretty much limited to sidereal Jyotish. Sidereal, it's a certain system, and it's good. Sidereal Jyotish is great, but it's just a small little facet of the diamond of Jyotish, which is, understanding of the mechanics of the universe, really, and how it affects everything, including us as individuals. And that's how we do our astrology charts, our Jyotish charts. So that's what that's all about. But there's another thing in in Jyotish, which is the Ugadi. Very few Jyotishis even know about this. It's not easy to calculate, but that tells what the predominant forces, if you will, what the weather is going to be, if you will, for weather in an expanded sense, for an individual or for the world. And the Ugadi for the world right now for this year is Mars. And Mars is a fiery energy, it's an intense energy. Now, certainly don't mean to say that Mars is all bad. Of course not. Mars has a lot of good values. But nevertheless, in conjunct with that, as I've said in the past, there's also this other thing in Jyotish with 60-year cycle. And we're in the 60th year, which is a year of anger. And so you combine a Mars Ugadi with a year of anger, and now you're starting to bring out certain values of Mars that may not be that desirable. And that's the year we're in. But fortunately, next year is a year of peace. And so that's something to look forward to. Okay, Scott, anything else?
No, that's good.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll talk.